At 9:30 in the evening on October 24, 1942, Sergeant Ralph Briggs lifted a damp field telephone receiver on a ridge about 3,000 yards south of Henderson Field and called the command post of the 1st Battalion, 7th Marine Regiment. The voice that answered belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Louis "Chesty" Puller, a man whose reputation in the Corps already carried the weight of legend. Briggs and the 46 Marines with him had been sitting motionless for hours, serving as an advanced observation post sent to detect the approach of Japanese forces. The night pressed around them like a living thing. Heavy clouds smothered the moon. The intermittent rain soaked their uniforms, ran down their helmets, and made the jungle floor slick with mud. Even the humidity felt oppressive, thick enough to breathe. Every sound carried unnaturally: the soft hiss of insects, the faint calls of night birds, the distant rumble of artillery in places unseen. Then Briggs heard something else. Voices, Japanese voices, many of them. He strained to listen. There was movement, the shuffle of boots through brush, thousands of men advancing in the darkness. What he reported next would determine whether the Marines defending Henderson Field would live or die. "Colonel," Briggs whispered, "there's about 3,000 Japs between you and me." Puller asked if he was sure. Briggs didn't hesitate. "Positive. They've been all around us, singing and smoking cigarettes, heading your way." That warning bought the Marines 30 precious minutes, no more, before 3,000 Japanese soldiers of the Sendai Division smashed into the southern line. 30 minutes to check weapons, stack ammunition, call for artillery, and mentally prepare for a night none of them would forget. The Americans defending Henderson Field numbered about 11,000 Marines and a recently arrived Army regiment. The Japanese had nearly 20,000 troops on Guadalcanal, and their commander, Lieutenant General Harakichi Hyakutake, had spent 2 weeks preparing what he believed would be the decisive battle of the entire Pacific War. Directly in the path of that coming storm sat a cluster of heavy machine gun positions commanded by a 26-year-old Marine from New Jersey named JohnBasilone. He had been on Guadalcanal since September 18th, leading 2 sections of water-cooled M1917 heavy machine guns for D Company. He was the son of an Italian immigrant tailor, one of 10 children raised in a working-class neighborhood where every family knew the next. He had left school after 8th grade, worked as a golf caddy, and then sought something more, a sense of purpose he eventually found in the military. At 17, he enlisted in the U.S. Army, served in the Philippines, and earned the nickname Manila John for his skill in the boxing ring. After leaving the Army, he tried civilian life, working as a truck driver, but the routine weighed on him. He missed the discipline, the camaraderie, and the meaning. By 1940 he enlisted again, this time in the Marine Corps, believing it would return him to the Philippines faster than the Army could. The Marines quickly saw his weapons expertise. They made him an instructor, but Basilone insisted on joining a combat unit. Soon he was a machine gun section leader in the 7th Marines, one of the best in the battalion with the M1917, a heavy, water-cooled, belt-fed machine gun capable of laying down punishing sustained fire. Now, on Guadalcanal, his job was brutally simple: hold the line no matter the cost. But the Japanese were coming with overwhelming numbers and a plan built on the assumption that the Marines would crack. The Sendai Division was among the most highly regarded in the Japanese Army. Hardened by training in Manchuria and fighting in Java, they believed the Americans would flee in panic once the assault began. The Marines, however, were worn down by months of fighting. Since capturing the unfinished Japanese airfield on August 7th, they had endured constant attacks, bombardments, starvation rations, and the draining effects of malaria. The operation to seize the island, Operation Watchtower, had been rushed to prevent the Japanese from completing the airstrip that would threaten Allied routes to Australia. The Marines landed unopposed, seized the airfield, finished its construction, and renamed it Henderson Field in honor of a pilot killed at Midway. Ever since, The Japanese had been throwing everything they could at the island, including nightly high-speed destroyer runs the Americans called the Tokyo Express. These delivered troops and light equipment, but lacked the capacity for heavy artillery or sufficient supplies. Nevertheless, Japanese reinforcements had continued arriving. One attack after another had failed: Ichiki's annihilation at Alligator Creek, then Kawaguchi's bloody defeat at Edson's Ridge. After these losses, the Japanese concentrated their largest offensive yet. Battleships shelled Henderson Field, reducing it to a smoking ruin. Thousands of troops and heavy guns slipped ashore under the cover of darkness. By late October, Hyakutake was certain victory was at hand. He even began drafting orders for the formal American surrender ceremony he expected to hold at Henderson Field. Japanese high command, and even the emperor, were watching closely. They believed this battle would determine the future of the Pacific. The Japanese plan called for a diversionary attack to the west and a main assault from the south, where Lieutenant General Masao Maruyama would lead the Sendai Division through a nightmarish stretch of jungle. That terrain was among the worst on the island: thick vegetation, deep ravines, and mud that swallowed men to the knees. For days the division hacked through the wilderness, mistaking their own position and believing they were much closer to the airfield than they actually were. They conducted no reconnaissance at all, planning to march until they hit the American lines and then overwhelm them with sheer weight. But their initial diversion at the Matanako River collapsed under devastating marine artillery fire. Over 6,000 shells tore apart Japanese infantry before they could cross. Tanks attempting to force the river were destroyed by marine anti-tank guns. The Japanese left hundreds of bodies on the riverbank. But the failed diversion succeeded in one respect: it shifted American attention westward, thinning the southern line, where Basilone waited with barely 1,000 Marines spread across a front meant for an entire regiment. As the night of October 24th deepened, the air hung wet and heavy with the smell of earth and rain. Basilone's guns sat on a ridge bordered by barbed wire and narrow fields of fire cut into the foliage. His crews had dug shallow pits and stacked sandbags around the positions. They were sick, many burning with fever from malaria, but there were no replacements. Basilone's voice broke the tension as he ordered final checks: water jackets topped off, ammunition stacked, firing lanes cleared. Then they waited. The jungle below sank into absolute darkness. Not even silhouettes were visible. They heard movement, then voices, then singing, hundreds of Japanese soldiers approaching with complete confidence that the Marines would not withstand the assault. The singing abruptly ceased. Silence followed. Then the Japanese artillery opened up. Mortars and mountain guns slammed into the ridge, flashes of light stabbing the darkness. Shrapnel ripped through trees. Men screamed. The barrage lasted half an hour. And then the infantry came. Out of the dark, they surged forward, hundreds of soldiers charging the ridge with rifles raised and voices screaming, "Banzai!" Basilone's machine guns roared to life. The heavy water-cooled guns spat continuous streams of fire, their tracers slicing through the night. Japanese soldiers fell in waves. Some dropped instantly, others stumbled, others crawled onward, but the machine guns never stopped. Basilone moved along the line, helping clear jams, redirecting fire, shouting orders above the thunder of battle. When the first attack collapsed, the Japanese pulled back and came again, this time throwing grenades and coordinating mortar strikes. One gun crew was obliterated by a direct hit. Basilone dragged a spare gun into position himself, ignoring the burns as he gripped its blazing metal. A third assault followed, more coordinated, more desperate, and aimed directly at Basilone's sector. His ammunition began to run dangerously low. The belts were disappearing faster than he could distribute them. If the guns went silent, the Japanese would pour through the gap straight to Henderson Field. Basilone made a decision that defied every battlefield rule. He left his position in the middle of the assault and sprinted into the jungle alone. He ran toward the ammunition dump 150 yards behind the line, carrying only his .45 pistol, moving through complete darkness filled with enemy infiltrators. He heard them whispering, moving among the trees, firing sporadically into marine foxholes. But he ran on. He loaded himself with nearly 90 pounds of ammunition, belts slung around his neck, ammo cans clutched in both hands, and staggered back toward the guns. He did this not once but 4 times throughout the night. On his second trip, he encountered a group of Japanese soldiers who had slipped behind the lines. In a moment illuminated by a flash of artillery, he saw them crouched near a fallen log. Basilone dropped the ammo, pulled his pistol, and fired. 3 fell instantly. The rest scattered into the shadows. He retrieved the belts and ran on. Mortars began walking along the trail during his 3rd trip. He threw himself into the mud again and again, hearing the whistle, then the blast, then the patter of shrapnel through the trees before forcing himself up and continuing. By his 4th run, he was barely conscious, running on instinct alone. But he made it, every time delivering enough ammunition to keep the guns firing. Back at the ridge, the fighting intensified. Another machine gun was knocked out by a grenade. Japanese bodies piled so high in front of the positions that the remaining guns could no longer depress far enough to hit those approaching behind the growing mound of dead. Basilone called for volunteers. Marines crawled into the killing ground under fire, dragging corpses out of the way to clear the guns' line of fire. The battle raged on through the night. Soldiers on both sides were soaked, exhausted, screaming, shooting, stumbling over bodies and roots and barbed wire in a chaos illuminated only by the red arc of tracers. Around 2 a.m., reinforcements from the Army's 164th Infantry Regiment arrived behind Puller's Marines, finally providing depth to the line. But the Japanese kept coming. Around 3 a.m., Basilone's guns boiled dry. With no water left, the barrels would warp and fail. Using the only liquid available, Basilone and his men urinated into the water jackets to cool the guns. The battle continued until after 4 a.m., when the attacks became erratic and disorganized. The Sendai Division was bleeding out. At dawn, the Japanese broke contact and drifted back into the jungle. The scene that morning defied comprehension. Hundreds of Japanese bodies blanketed the ridge in layers, some piled 3 or 4 high. The smell of cordite, blood, and death clung to the humid air. Basilone and the remnants of his crew sat among their guns, caked in mud, sweat, and blood, barely able to stand, yet still alive. Puller walked the line in silence, surveying the carnage. Nearly 1,000 Japanese soldiers lay dead in front of Basilone's sector alone. Of Basilone's original 16 machine gun crewmen, only he and 2 others remained unwounded. The rest were dead or gravely injured. The Japanese returned on the night of October 25th, but now the Marines were reinforced and ready. They repelled the assault with far fewer casualties. By dawn on October 26th, Hyakutake called off the offensive. His Sendai Division had ceased to exist as a fighting force. Over 1,500 were dead, another 1,000 wounded or missing. The survivors stumbled into the jungle, starving and broken. The Marines had lost about 60 men, most in other sectors. In Basilone's area, the line had held, with staggering cost. In the aftermath, Marine patrols discovered personal items on the bodies of fallen Japanese soldiers, family photographs, letters from mothers, wives, daughters, sons. Many had written farewell notes before the attack, accepting death as duty. The Marines who found these letters were struck by their similarity to the notes they themselves carried from home. For a moment, The humanity of both sides pierced the brutal fog of war. But the realities of combat remained. The Japanese had come to kill every Marine on that ridge. The Marines had fought to stop them. One side endured. The other did not. The American victory at Henderson Field marked the turning point of the Guadalcanal campaign. Before that night, the outcome of the operation had teetered dangerously. The Japanese held the numerical advantage and retained control of the surrounding seas. But after the Sendai Division was shattered, the Japanese no longer possessed the strength needed to retake the island. Their momentum evaporated. Their troops retreated into the deep jungle, no longer a force capable of launching major attacks. The balance of power had shifted. And at the center of that turning point was a Marine sergeant from New Jersey, burned, exhausted, and barely conscious, who simply refused to let his line break. JohnBasilone's actions that night would echo through Marine Corps history. 4 desperate ammunition runs through enemy-held jungle, single-handed defense of a critical machine gun sector, and a stubborn courage that helped prevent a breakthrough that could have changed the entire Pacific War. The ridge where he stood would forever be tied to his name, and the legend of Manila John would be born in the darkness of that terrible, decisive night.